Philippine cinema in its early years was caught between the retreating Hispanic culture and the incoming Anglo-American culture that both asserted their influence over a colonized society through the new technology of cinema. Back then, no one would have foreseen how this young art form would eventually become the most popular of the arts, nor could they have predicted how two colonial cultures would intertwine with the emergent Filipino culture in an art form that seamlessly wove together the other arts: theater, music, dance, and literature.
I was invited into this project by the senior writer, Mr. Gaspar Vibal, and I was so honored. So I decided to join the team, and it went so very well. The book is encyclopedic in approach. We have included as much details as possible and check them for accuracy. Future filmmakers can make it as a not only as a visual but as a factual reference of how film was developed from the earliest time to the present. So they can compare, future filmmakers can compare and the techniques used during that the earliest period up to the present time.
Gus and Dennis, the two authors in this book, were attempting to put forth a compendium, really a very, very encyclopedic reference book that attempts to cover 100 years of Philippine cinema. And this is something that is sorely needed because we don't have anything like this.
As film historian Nick De Ocampo observed, cinema in the Philippines was born as twin to the nation and mirrored events surrounding and shaping the destiny of the emerging nation-state. During the Philippine-American War and the early years of American rule, the new colonizers used the art form of moving pictures as a propaganda tool to prop up their regime. In the U.S., James Henry White, Elias Burton Holmes, and C. Fred Ackerman produced newsreels about the Philippines for the American market. Both Ackerman and Holmes traveled to the Philippines to shoot travel shorts and newsreels on location. Later, former American military officer Frank H. Goulet opened the Lyric Theater and established the Lyric Film Exchange to engage in the distribution of foreign films. The cinematographer became so popular that the viewing public called the theater used for screening pictures the Cinematografo Teatro. They later coined the word cine as a generic term to refer to film, while they dubbed the place where it was projected a cinehan. The 1920s saw increased debate in the public sphere regarding women and modernity after women earned the right of suffrage in several countries. In the Philippines, this subject would remain a matter of raging discussion. On the cinema screen, Hollywood's images of modern women, including flappers, vamps, and other figures, were shocking to traditionalist Filipinos. There was much concern about these women appearing as sex objects or as models of what were now regarded as modern.
Especially Philippine cinema, I mean, it always reflects whatever is happening in society, and in particularly about the absence or presence of women. And women have always been present in Philippine cinema. Philippine cinema has been side by side, has been an ally in depicting and showing us how women have advanced in our society.
Although women have appeared on screen as a major part of the spectacle of cinema since its beginnings, there were a few Filipinos who expressed themselves and made their impression behind the camera in this new popular medium. 5 women particularly stand out in early Philippine cinema history for their roles in challenging the conservative mores of the time. Although many early films were in Spanish or English, by the end of the 1930s, Tagalog had become more and more clearly established as the lingua franca of Philippine cinema. This development paralleled the growing prominence of the Tagalog language in print, with serialized Tagalog novels or periodicals soaring in popularity. The close connection between literature and cinema could be seen by how quickly these novels were adapted for film. World War II and the Japanese occupation of the Philippines left lingering scars on Philippine society, even with the euphoria of victory and the war's end in 1945. Searing remembrances of war and suffering enveloped the nation. Filipinos flocked to the movies as a source of catharsis, a way to escape the horrors of the past or the uncertainties of the present. But post-war audiences could no longer be fully satisfied with the idyllic and simplistic, romantic, or comedic films of pre-war times. They wanted to see stories that in some way reflected the complex reality they lived in. Philippine cinema had entered a new and charted era. This so-called golden age of Philippine cinema was marked by the re-emergence of the studio system that had begun in the 1930s. The great Filipino film studios, Sampaguita, Premiere, Lebran, LVN, would in time dominate the industry and exert oligopolistic control over the production and distribution of movies and the creation of movie stars. The 1960s was a decade of social unrest when the big three studios of Sampaguita, LVN, and Premiere found themselves dealing with an emerging organized labor movement. Movie crews demanded better pay and working conditions, thus driving up production costs. This, combined with escalating pay for actors and the difficulty of holding on to a stable of rising celebrity stars, forced the once dominant studios to cede ground, little by little, to independent, contractual, and multi-star studios. The grim realities of martial law turned a generation of filmmakers away from escapism and crowd-pleasing formulaic storytelling. Although the dictatorship initially clamped down on the media, the film industry escaped relatively unscathed. However, state censorship now required the pre-approval of scripts prior to shooting. A generation of film artisans trained in academia arose, producing a new type of intelligent cinema. While remaining firmly in the orbit of commercial cinema, several outstanding directors emerged in the period of the new wave cinema of the 1970s and 1980s. Ishmael Bernal, Celso Ad Castillo, Mike De Leon, Peque Galiaga, Marilu Diaz-Abaya, Loris Guillen, and Mario O'Hara. A brilliant batch of independent filmmakers and original voices also emerged during this turbulent era, including Kidlat Tahimik, Raymond Red, and the documentary and short filmmaker Nick De Ocampo.
It was in the era of martial law that the second golden age happened. And many masterpieces were made. It's a good thing many of these films still exist. So we're able to enjoy them, and the evidence is there that this indeed was the second golden age, and it was a kind of renaissance in spite of the, shall we say, the political situation at the time that inspired many of these filmmakers to come up with some of the most provocative works, and which I think have cemented their reputations, and also these films have made a dent in the movie-going public, and not just in the Philippines, but I think also outside.
The public's longing for escapism from the harsh realities of poverty, crime, and social injustice had reached a peak in the 1960s and early 1970s when a young provincial singer named Nora Honor burst onto the scene and became an overnight sensation. Nora not only diverted the Philippine movie-going public from their growing demand for sex-related bold films, She also broke the ascendance of mestizo-looking actors that had been enforced by the studio system since the 1930s. Millions of disenfranchised fans identified strongly with Honor's rags-to-riches personal narrative. By the 1980s, Honor sought to make a film that would powerfully retell her story while giving back to her fans who had supported her through thick and thin. This was the iconic 1982 film, Himala, collaborated on by two outstanding film artisans, Ishmael Bernal and Ricky Lee.
And Nora Honor succeeded because I think the massa, they were able to identify with her and also with her suffering in her films. And they were able to relate to her because she looked like them. She was not glamorized, she was not mestiza, she was just one of them. And of course, her great talent in both acting and singing enhanced her reputation. And in particular, in the late 60s and the 70s, she was on the top of her game. She was phenomenal.
Political turmoil, public unrest, and uncertainty after 1986 fueled yet another resurgence of bold films, a phenomenon that mirrored the turbulent bomba era of the early 70s. Just as Nora Honor captured the public's attention away from the clamor for bomba films in the 1970s, a young singer emerged in the 1980s to break the trend toward bold films and seize the national imagination as a cinematic star, Sharon Cuneta. In many ways, Cuneta seemed to follow the same path as Nora Honor. From being a teenage singing idol, she successfully crossed over to acting with massively successful teen flicks such as P.S. I Love You and Dear Heart, which paired her with on-screen love interest Gabi Concepcion.
She was first and foremost a teen star, and many people, especially the young ones, also identified with her. We have the so-called kilig effect in Philippine cinema. That's why when she appeared in many romance movies or teen romance movies with Gabi Concepcion, it became a hit.
The popularity in the 1980s of films and shows based on romance novel plots was tied in with the power of the emotional kilig factor to enthrall the Filipino public. Decades later, one on-screen couple epitomized the continuing hold of kilig on Filipino audiences. And the booming influence of social media and internet fandom on the film and entertainment industry. Maine Yaya Dub Mendoza and Alden Richards, known together as Aldub, became a phenomenon as two unlikely stars who were propelled from social media to television and then to the cinema by viral fandom.
Social media, yes, has been a very positive accomplice of the film industry. Without social media, we would not be discussing films. Because a lot of discussions now, especially during the age of streaming, has been through social media.
Well, it did improve the Philippine film industry in that many filmmakers can now present their movies in a social media platform, but it also killed many mainstream filmmakers by the way that many mainstream mainstream filmmakers now have to compete with social media in order to earn some income.
Digital technology and independent filmmaking invigorated Philippine cinema. Freed from having to cater to commercially oriented studios or mainstream audiences, younger filmmakers can run with riskier narratives, developing new types of filmic language and ways of seeing.
I guess the themes then and now, many of them still remain the same, except that the range of the stories has expanded. there were things that could not be expressed before because of stricter censorship and taboos. No? So now things are easier because a lot of restrictions have been lifted. And I think the audience is smarter now. Maybe there is a less authoritarian approach, no, by our government in terms of what can be expressed. Although, of course, in certain situations, the waters are still being tested.
As the coronavirus spread across the globe in 2020, stringent quarantine and social distancing measures affected almost every aspect of life, and the film industry was no exception. While a traditional film set requires a crew of around 100 at least, under the new normal, this number must be reduced by half to ensure the safety and health of workers. Indie filmmakers and even big studios have circumvented these limitations on production by launching innovative web-based films and series such as Hello Stranger from ABS-CBN's Black Sheep Productions, a boys' love romance about two college students collaborating on a school project via Zoom.
The streaming services like Netflix or iFlix, as well as YouTube, for example, they change the way we view films because now you can view your favorite films in the comfort of your home. And with the arrival of big TV screens as well as home sound system, you can enjoy films from the comfort of your home without going out to view them in cinema. And also, the experience of going to the cinema, although it is much more exciting to go to the cinema than to be in the comfort of your. In the time of this pandemic, we have no choice but to make do of what we have. Just view these films in the internet.
In the age of streaming, there has been some kind of leveling the playing field, you know. But at the same time, there is also a lot of leveling up happening because filmmakers have become more creative. They've become more innovative. They have started to see so many other examples, not just of Philippine cinema, but world cinema. They are exposed now. I think there's greater film literacy now, you know, among our filmmakers and film audience. And this can only mean that people will be filmmakers will be making more newer, more exciting kinds of films, and the audience will also be looking for something new, something that is out of their usual realm of interest.
Through war, revolution, social upheaval, political turmoil, martial law, censorship, pandemic, the art of cinema has remained constant and yet ever-changing as the times. Changes in social norms, changes in government, changes in society, changes in fashion, changes in technology, all have shaped cinema, the twin of the nation, mirroring its history and projecting its image on screens, big and small.